pass on the mic, the virtual mic, to Dr. AbdulFatah Adesina to go through his presentation. Bismillah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى أهله وأصحابه ومن سلك طريقهم إلى يوم يبعثون. Thank you for inviting me to give this talk today. So I was asked to talk about heart-related conditions, especially as it applies to us as Blacks or Afro-Caribbeans, because it seems some of those conditions seem to be more prevalent amongst us compared to, for example, Caucasians. So we call them cardiovascular diseases, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. But of the ones, there's so many of them, we're going to consider 3 of them. That would be high blood pressure, or what we call hypertension. Also, we'll talk about stroke, which I'm sure we're all aware of. And then we'll touch briefly on what in layman terms we call cardiac or heart attack. So now going back to the original topic, which was heart conditions or cardiovascular conditions. So cardiovascular basically means cardiac is heart, and vascular means the vessels. So the heart basically pumps the blood. Let me see, just want to adjust my camera a bit.
That's better.
Is it better? Okay. So the heart basically pumps the blood, and the function of the blood is to carry nutrients and oxygen to the various parts of the body. So the kidneys, for example, the brain, the eyes will not work unless they have sufficient oxygen and sufficient nutrients, which we get from the food that we eat. So that is in simple terms what the heart does. So it carries the blood, make sure it's pumped adequately so that the blood can go through these vessels that we call the vascular vessels, which are like pipes. So they are what we call the veins and the arteries. To ensure that those nutrients and oxygen gets to the vital organs that need them in order for us to for them to work and for us to continue living. Now, so there might be all the usual problems are related to this basic function of the heart. Before I go further, one of the other things that the heart does in the process of getting the nutrients and oxygen to these cells or the organs is it does it in 2 ways. First is that it takes one part of the blood, which doesn't have oxygen, it takes it to the lung. So the lung, when we breathe in, we're taking oxygen and some other gases, but the oxygen is the one that we need. And so the heart take one half of it to the lungs for them to be oxygenated or to get oxygen supply. And then when they return back to the heart, that's why we have different chambers. It then pumps the nutrient-filled, oxygen-filled blood to the rest of the body. So I just want to quickly clarify that bit before I go on. Now, so if you look at that basic function, it looks very basic, but it's actually very complex. And if anything goes wrong in that process, that's what results in the various heart disease or conditions that we are going to talk about today. So let's start with high blood pressure. So basically, to pump the blood adequately to the various parts of the body, the heart has to pump it under pressure. So there is pressure to move the blood through the vessels to the organs that need it. And that's normally okay. It's within what the heart can do if there are no problems. But there will be problems if there are blockages along the vessels. It means the heart has to pump a bit more to overcome the blockages or narrowing for the blood to get to the vessels. So let's give us a sort of day-to-day scenarios that we see. So if you notice, if you try to blow up or inflate a balloon, a small balloon, it's more difficult than if you try to inflate a big one. Or the long balloon, it's more difficult to inflate than the rounded one. It's because you need more pressure to inflate them or to blow them up compared to the rounded ones. So the same thing happens with the heart. That's what happens in high blood pressure. It's the fact that the vessels are narrowing for whatever reason, or they are not flexible anymore. They are becoming hardened. So the heart needs to do more work in order to pump the same amount of blood to get to the various organs. Hence, we call it high blood pressure or hypertension, because the pressure that the heart now needs to use to pump is much higher than what it should normally. So for typical example, or textbook example, we say blood pressure should be in the range of 120/80. I'll stick to the 120 figure for now. So that 120 figure, it varies, from individual to individual for your age and things like that. But let's just take that as for the purpose of explaining high blood pressure. Now, so that should be what we expect most average adults to have the top one to be around 120. People that have high blood pressure could have something in the range of 150, 160, 200. Some people have 230. So it means the heart is really working really hard. So if I say the normal or the expected normal is around 120, and you're putting your heart through so much work that it needs almost double that amount to pump the blood to the vital organs, then there's a problem. Even in day-to-day activities, if you're given that balloon to blow up or to inflate, and it's taking you twice as much energy or pressure, effort to inflate it, you rather not do that and take another one. And what's going to happen if you continue so much to blow it or to inflate it, and you can't succeed? What you do is you give up. And that's what happens when we say the heart has failed. In heart failure, what happens in heart failure is that the heart just gives up. It can't continue to manage that blood pressure anymore. The blood pressure is going too much for it. It can't, so it fails. And basically, that's what we call when we talk about heart failure or cardiac failure. But we'll go into that a bit more later on. It's not one of the main one we want to talk about, but we can touch on it, inshallah, if time permits. Now, so that's in simple terms. That's hypertension or high blood pressure. Now, is it bad? We've mentioned that the heart can fail if that blood pressure is too high, but also other problems can happen. It can actually burst any of the pipes because of the blood pressure. So it can tear the vessels, which what happens in there's a condition we call dissection. So if your blood pressure is too high and you're prone to it, it can literally just tear the blood vessel, and which can lead to instant death. It's also one of the causes of one of the two types of stroke, which we call hemorrhagic stroke, where the person actually bleeds into their brain because the vessels are under so much pressure that they just literally tear apart. But there are other causes as well. I've just explained it in relation to hypertension. So that's hypertension. The second condition we're going to consider, I'll come to the risk factors and treatment later. The second condition, I just want to explain those conditions in simple terms. Second condition we're going to talk about is stroke. So what happens in stroke? Stroke, sometimes in some parts of the world, they actually call it brain attack, because it's similar to what happens in heart attack. And what happens in stroke is that the blood supply to a section of the brain is cut off. I remember I mentioned at the start that the various parts of our body need oxygen and nutrients to function. If they don't have this oxygen and nutrients, they will literally die. Now, the time that it takes with different parts of the body to die varies. It's going to take longer for muscles to die compared to the brain. So the brain cannot actually take insults. If the blood supply to the brain is cut off, that section of the brain will die, and it may actually affect the whole of the brain as well. So what happens is that the blood supply in stroke, the blood supply to some certain part of the brain is cut off. How is it? How does this happen? How do we get to this situation where the blood supply to the brain is cut off? It's basically two main mechanisms. There are other ones, but these two ones are the ones that are important. So the first one is if there is blockage of the supply to the brain. So this blockage will be a mechanical blockage. So it might be that the vessel over time is collecting rubbish in it, like cholesterol or bad fat, which is now making the lumen of the tube to narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow, and it gets to a point, any small thing that blocks it will just cut off the blood supply. So that's the first type. We call it thrombotic stroke. Or sometimes it's because the clots in parts of the body, which we all form clots, but some are bad. If these clots are formed, which are small blood clots, they can go and block those vessels, and then the blood supply to the brain is just cut off. We'll address what we can do to avoid this later on. So that's the first type. The second type is what we call the hemorrhagic stroke or the bleeding stroke. And what happens in that is that there's so much pressure, the vessels are under so much pressure, they burst. And because they busted, the blood is not actually getting to the brain tissue that need it. It's just floating around. The blood is just floating around. It's not getting to the tissues that need it. And that's what we call the hemorrhagic stroke. This is actually more common in people with high blood pressure. And that's why we need to, as a community or a race, we need to address the issue of blood pressure very, take it seriously, address it always. So those are the two types of stroke and how stroke causes damage. Now, if you're lucky that you get treatment before there's too much damage to that part of the brain, you might actually recover. If a large part of that section has not been damaged, they are treated and then they go through what we call rehabilitation. So in rehabilitation, they train the body to be able to do those functions again. So for example, some people have weak arms and weak legs, but after some time, if the damage is not too much, they can actually be rehabilitated to be able to function almost back to normal again, or in some cases actually back to normal. But if the damage is too much or too late before we can reverse the situation, then it remains permanent. And some people actually die, especially the second type of stroke that I mentioned. If the bleeding is so much, it can actually kill, which when we come to treatment and other things, will come to that. And the last of the three main topics that we want to address, other these heart conditions, is what we call heart attack. So what do we mean when we say heart attack? So if you recall what I mentioned in regards to brain attack, stroke, I said the blood supply to the brain is cut off. This is exactly what happens in heart attack as well. The blood supply to the heart is cut off. So actually, it's very interesting the way Allah has designed the body. So the heart pumps blood to various parts of the body, but it actually also supplies itself blood so that it can also get nutrients and oxygen. So although it does it in a it's done in a very clever way in that it supplies itself blood when it's not supplying others, but it's all happening in that cycle when the heart beats as well. So basically the heart also supplies itself blood so that it can keep working. Otherwise there will not be energy. So what happens in heart attack is that the blood supply to the heart itself, the vessel that supply heart itself, gets blocked. And again, is usually due to thrombus, like we said before, which is clots, blood clots, or cholesterol and fat that is already blocking these vessels over a period of years sometimes. So, which will come to what causes this blockage when we talk about risk factors and treatments. So, but just for us to understand, basically what happens in a heart attack is that the blood supply to the heart is cut off. And that's why people have heart attack, because there's no energy, there's no oxygen, there's no nutrients to the heart. And so that section of the heart that's attacked or that is deprived of oxygen literally dies. But if they are treated early enough, they may not die, or the part of it might recover and still be able to function close to normal. So those are the three conditions or common conditions under heart conditions that we're going to consider today. The good thing is that the risk factors that we need to look at are things that will predispose us to having these three conditions are similar, actually. So if we manage those things correctly, we will reduce our risk of getting any of these three conditions, or even the fourth one I mentioned earlier, which is the heart failure, uh, in, in a considerable amount. Um, so now, so the risk factors or things that will make us at risk of getting on any of these conditions that I mentioned earlier. So the first two that I'm going to mention is not actually much of problems, but I just want to mention that is part of the standard risk factors for any of these conditions. So the first one is alcohol. Alhamdulillah, this audience that we're talking to, that's not our problem. But I just want to mention that it's one major risk factors for all these heart conditions, alcohol intake. The second one is smoking. So smoking also increases risk of developing what we call cardiovascular diseases, which can lead to any of the three conditions that we mentioned earlier. So again, this isn't much of a problem in our community, but it's just good to know that if you have relatives or that they are still smoking, you need to let them know that amongst all the other problems that smoking can cause, heart-related conditions are top on the list. So there are other things like cancer, lung cancer, and other things like that. So I'm quickly take off those two on the list: alcohol and smoking. Now I'm going to move on to another risk factor, and that's age. So these conditions are much more common in the over 50s, but doesn't mean that it can't happen under 50s. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you are getting close to 50 or around 50 or above, you need to take care of your health, even pay more attention to your health than what you used to do in the past. And this is more important for our men folk. The women are naturally better at doing this. They seek more medical help, but men actually don't. We usually feel that we are strong. I'll just continue to work and do everything that we do. And then usually things just deteriorate very quickly. So I'm just appealing to us, and this applies to myself as well. There's been so many studies to confirm that women seek health care far more than men do. And it's important that we men, and especially if you are over 40, about 50 and above, you need to take your health conditions more seriously. The NHS actually will contact you once you are 40 to invite you for a routine health check. Part of the things they will check is to check your risk factors for these conditions that we mentioned, because they know that from 40 and above, that's when the problem starts. It's worse after 50, but usually if I would generally advise 40 and above, let's make sure we check go to our GPs to check our, uh, our health status on a regular basis. So age is another risk factor. And there's nothing we can do about age. If you last phase your life and you grow old, there's nothing we can do about that. But it's a risk factor. It's just to let us know that if you're getting older, then your chances of getting very bad disease conditions will increase. And so we need to note that. Another risk factor we'll consider is being Asian or being Afro-Caribbean. It's actually a risk factor on its own. So Caucasians or white people, they suffer less of this cardiovascular diseases compared to us and the Asians. So even though when we break it into small, and go into more details, Asians are more susceptible to heart attack and things like that more than us as Black. We are more susceptible to stroke, hemorrhagic stroke, the one that causes bleeding to the brain, more than the Asians and the Caucasians. But it's not, I don't want to bore us with the details or confuse us. The key point I want us to notice that being Black or Asian means that there's a higher chance of you having high blood pressure compared to your white colleague who is doing exactly the same thing that you're doing. We'll come to some of the things that actually makes us more susceptible as Black. Some of it is just genetic. We're just genetically more prone to having these conditions than whites. But it doesn't mean that we'll have it. If you take care of yourself, you might actually be able to manage it. But just to know that it's just natural that we are more prone to having these conditions compared to our Caucasian colleagues. There are other conditions they have as well, or they're more prone to have that we are less prone to have. So for example, cystic fibrosis, it's common it happens in the Caucasians, we don't have it in Black people. And that's how, different conditions like that. So just being Black means that we are more prone to have these disease conditions compared to Caucasians. Another risk factor is family history. So if you have a family history of high blood pressure, then you should be careful because you are likely to get high blood pressure yourself. And what do I mean by this? So if your father or your mother has a high blood pressure, then you're likely to have high blood pressure. Same thing goes for some other condition like diabetes. You may avoid you might be able to manage your lifestyle that you won't have it, but it's just for you to know that you're actually likely to have it. So you need to be extra careful that someone that does not have history of high blood pressure or stroke in their family. So if in your family, your uncle or your granddad or dad died of heart attack or died of stroke or things like that, then you should be more careful. It means that there's something running in the family. You probably need more checkups than the average person on the street so that you can manage your lifestyle and take the necessary medications so that you don't actually get any of these conditions eventually. The next few ones are actually linked together, and I'm going to take them together. And that's being overweight. So too much weight is problematic for the heart, partly because the heart will need to do more work to pump into all the extra fats that we've collected. Generally speaking, it's just bad for your health. And we'll go into a bit more details later. So too much weight or being overweight, inactivity. So if you're always sitting or on the internet, just sitting or sleeping around and not doing much activity, or your work involves a lot of sitting, then you need to modify your lifestyle. So inactivity also predisposes to hypertension, which will eventually also link to stroke and link to heart attack eventually. So inactivity is another thing. So because they're all linked together, there is cardiovascular conditions. And lastly, is for now, I'm sure there'll be questions on the other risk factors later. It's high cholesterol. So too much of cholesterol, especially what we call the bad cholesterol, because there are two types, or more than two types. But let's, in simple terms, we divide into good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. So too much of bad cholesterol is not good for the body. It actually make you prone to having high blood pressure and heart attack. So let's note all these points because some of them we can actually modify, some other ones we can't. So for example, your age, you can't modify your age. You just keep getting older and older. There's nothing we can do about that. So there isn't much. It's just for us to be aware that the older we are, the more likely for us to get any of these conditions. But there are things that we can modify, like the kind of food we eat, or our weight, how we control our weight. Those are things that we can actually modify, and they make a big difference as to who eventually then gets high blood pressure or who gets complications from any of these three conditions. Because you can have high blood pressure for years if you manage it very well, good lifestyle, and take the necessary medication. You may not suffer from any of the major complications at all. So I've known of patients that have been on blood pressure medications for 40, 50 years, and they are living normal lifestyle. So I need to mention this because there's also, how do I call it? This misconception that if you take blood pressure medications, that's a problem. No, it's not a problem at all. There are so many blood pressure tablets that we can take these days. Some have side effects, some don't have side effects that will affect everybody. So there are options that we can take. So the point is that if you are then diagnosed with high blood pressure, it's actually manageable. It's not curable. It doesn't go. I need to clarify that. It doesn't go. It's not like malaria. So it's going to remain with you. But if you manage it very well, you'll be fine. Nobody will know that you have high blood pressure. It doesn't show on the face. Doesn't affect it. But it's only when you refuse to manage it, that's when the complications then come through. Okay, so that's on the risk factors that causes these cardiovascular conditions. Now I'm going to go into a little bit more details now for high blood pressure, and just give you some general statistics or figures to know why we need to take it more seriously in our community. So on an average, we suffer from high blood pressure twice as the average Caucasian. And there's another study that actually shows that we have severe high blood pressure about 5 times more than other people, especially in the inner cities, like, New York, London, Lagos, and places like that, where there are other things that are adding to the pressure that is also making the heart to be under more pressure. So the point I want to make here is that we are actually more prone to having these conditions, and we are prone to having the complications. So we can't shy away from it. It's something that if you live long enough, even if you manage your lifestyle very well, you'll get it eventually. And so don't deny it when you have it, that oh, I don't have symptoms, I don't have anything, so it will go. Now, what are the symptoms to know whether you have high blood pressure or not? The vast majority of the time, you actually don't have any symptoms at all. And it's just, unfortunately, some people, the first time they know that they have high blood pressure is when they have a stroke, which is rather sad. Some other people is when they have a heart attack, that's when they know they have high blood pressure. It's actually a silent killer. Other people is because they have a kidney failure and now they now need dialysis. That's when they know that they've been suffering from blood pressure over the years. So the only way to know, don't look out for the symptoms. Some people have symptoms, they have headaches, a constant headache that's not going after taking paracetamol, and you can't see. So that can be a feature, for example. Some other people is breathlessness. Some people is the way their sight and things like that. But essentially, you may not have any symptoms at all. So you may not suspect it. So the only way is that you do, once in a while check with your GP, or you can buy over the counter or on Amazon, for example, blood pressure monitoring equipment, just to check at intervals, not every day if you're not hypertensive, just at intervals, so as to know when you develop it or whether or not you have it. That's about the safest way. So either you go to your healthcare professionals to check it, or you can check it yourself, because it may actually not show any symptoms at all until it causes the damage that which we all don't want. Okay, so sorry, that's talking about symptoms or what you need to look out for high blood pressure. So essentially, you may not have any symptoms, and the key thing is to check. Either you measure it yourself or you go to healthcare professionals to help you to check. And if they tell you that you have high blood pressure, usually what they will do is that they will ask you to come back again, because sometimes it goes up temporarily because we might be anxious, because you don't know what we are human beings, and then anxiety happens. Also, it varies depending on what's going on in your life. For example, if you're under stress, or you're depressed, or you're anxious about any particular thing, it might go up temporarily and then it can come down back later. So that's why, unless it's dangerously high, what usually the healthcare professionals will do is they will ask you to go and then come back again to check it. They'll change the conditions and see whether it's a temporary thing or if you actually have a high blood pressure, if it's a permanent thing. If they conclude that you got the permanent high blood pressure, we need to manage it. We need to take it seriously and manage it. It doesn't go. The high blood pressure doesn't go. If it's the high blood pressure, it's hypertension that is well established, it doesn't go. It stays with you for the rest of your life. But it doesn't mean that you'll be debilitated or that you'll not be able to do your normal day-to-day activities. We have seen patients that are over 100 years old and they've been diagnosed with hypertension for like 60 years and they still live till over 100 years. And they're still active, not just living, they're active till over 100 years old. So the diagnosis itself is not a bad news. What is bad news if you don't manage it properly. Now, so how do we manage it properly? So the first thing is regular monitoring, as we mentioned earlier. So either these days it's so easy, you don't need to. In the past, it used to be some mercury thermometer, which is a bit complicated and it's not readily available. But now there are simpler ones that don't use mercury. We can buy it on Amazon or some other places, and they are cheap and you can measure it. They are not very accurate, but they give you a rough idea So if it's consistently high, it probably means it is high. If it's consistently normal, it probably means it's normal. So, but it's not very accurate. So you might read reviews that say, oh, it's not accurate, but it gives you, it's okay to have them and work with that. The second thing is that we need to reduce our salt intake. Now, this is a big problem in our community because we use a lot of salt in our normal cooking. So the recommended amount of salt in a day is a teaspoon. So that's about 5 grams of salt in a day. But that means it's not just the 5 that you put in the soup you're cooking or in the rice. It's the total salt for the day. So we're talking about the salt in the nor cube you are using to cook. So we're talking about the salt that's been added to the roasted meat or roasted fish or dried fish that you're using to cook. So when you add everything together, you know, even though you might think that you just put in 1 tablespoon or 1 teaspoon of salt in your meal, but when you add this other extra sources of salt, sometimes we are piling up to like 20 or 25. So more than 4 or 5 times what's required of us is what we are taking. And this is one of the reasons why we are even more prone to having high blood pressure. And it's one thing that we can easily modify that will reduce our risk. So for example, some studies have shown that when people actually cut down their salt intake, you see a big difference in their blood pressure within 2 weeks. That's how effective it is. So within 2 weeks, it actually changes things. And if you are able to maintain that lifestyle, you know, then it reduces your risk of getting if you don't have it already. And if you already have it, it actually reduces, it makes it easier for you or your body to manage it, or for the medications to manage it. It's much more difficult if you continue to eat excessive salt. And we need to look into the condiments that we use, seasoning that we use in cooking. Some of the cheaper ones are actually the ones with a lot of salt. So it's been shown that 1 cube or stock cube can contain as much as 5 grams of salt. So just 1 cube. So that's what you need for the whole day. So don't forget that you may have salt in the drinks that you take. You have salt if you're taking rice, for example, in the soup or stew, there's also salt. So those extra ones. So let's be careful the ones that we buy. You can read the labels. The cheaper ones are actually the ones with more salt. The reason is because salt is very cheap. It's just available everywhere, in the oceans and everything, so they can process it and produce it cheaply. So if they put more salt rather than putting other things in making those seasoning, then it's cheaper. So it's just for us to be careful that you might say, oh, why are you buying this particular brand? Why don't you buy that particular brand? Just be careful. It doesn't mean that the more expensive one contains a lot less salt. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that let's be a bit more conscious when we buy the seasonings that we use to do our normal day-to-day cooking. Okay. So salt, it's very important in the management of high blood pressure. Medications. So if you are diagnosed with high blood pressure, I want to reemphasize again, it doesn't go. You need to be on medications for the rest of your life. Now, the medication may vary. They might need to increase the dose. You might need to decrease the dose if you're managing very well. But usually, we don't take people off it. Some people are on just 1 tablet, and that's fine because they're managing their lifestyle very well. Some other people are on up to 5 different tablets just to manage just high blood pressure alone, because some people it's difficult. They have what we call essential hypertension. I don't know why we can't control them with 1 or 2 tablets. Some other people is because of their lifestyle. So they're sedentary, there's a lot of inactivities, they don't walk around, they eat a lot of salt and then cholesterol and the other things that we mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's high blood pressure, how to recognize it in simple terms, that it actually is difficult to recognize. You may not know whether you have it or not unless you check it. And how to manage it, which is basically lifestyle change. And I want to emphasize salt in particular because it affects us as Black communities. Food are very tasty, but that also means that we use a lot of salt compared to like Caucasians, and also because they're tasty, we eat a lot, which then adds too much salt to the food that we eat. And then the medication, I want to stress that medications are important. If you are put on medications, don't stop it. If you are on medication and then you check your blood pressure and it's normal, it doesn't mean that you don't have hypertension anymore. What it just means is that it's under control because of your blood pressure. Because people get it wrong. They'll say, I've checked it, it's gone. Since they have been on that tablet for some time, it's not gone. You won't know when it will creep back and it will cause damage. And sadly, a lot of people, the only time they then realize that they've got this high blood pressure is when they come in stroke or in heart attack or kidney failure, and then they now need to be on dialysis for the rest of your life if they can't get a kidney donor. Okay, so I'm going to stop there briefly for hypertension. Stroke and heart attack, I'm going to address them from the other risk factors that are maybe a bit more specific to them. So they are, if you recall, the mechanism is similar. So which is that the blood supply either to the heart in case of heart attack or to the brain in case of brain attack, which we call stroke, is blocked off. And this blocking off is usually due to small blood clots or to sort of debris, like which are usually from bad cholesterol, which accumulates in the blood vessels over time. They accumulate. So in the case of heart attack, sometimes some people have symptoms before they have the heart attack. We call it angina. And what happens in angina is that the blood supply to the heart is not completely blocked off, but it's narrowing. And so because it's narrowing, when they do activities that they are normally able to do, they will have to stop because they're having pain in their chest. Because the body can't keep up to supply the blood that the heart needs, because the tube that needs to, or the tubes that connect and supply the heart are narrowing. So the heart can't supply itself enough blood. It then moves from that level to where the narrowing is even worse, and even at rest, they will have pain in their chest or pain in their heart. Because even resting or doing talking and things like simple activities that we just don't take and you don't think deeply about them, that they actually need energy and blood supply to the various parts of the body, will now be causing them problem. So watching TV will cause them problem with their heart, which might affect their breathing and other things like that. So that's angina. But some other people, they don't even have the prior symptoms. The first symptoms they have is that they just have this massive chest pain, or they feel short of breath, or some other people present in different ways, might be harm and pain and things like that. And before you know it, a section of the heart is already dead. So what are the other things that we can do apart from what I've mentioned under high blood pressure that we can do to help us to be able to avoid having a heart attack or stroke, especially with respect to lifestyle modification. Now I'm going to go in a little bit more into cholesterol and body weight and inactivity, because again, that's another problem that we need to address. And there's a background to it. In the past, people used to say, for example, in Nigeria, where I come from, I'm assuming most of us come from, if you recall, in the past, they used to say, oh, hypertension and diabetes is disease of the rich people. And we all just laugh about it and just leave it at that. But why is it a disease of the rich people? Because if I explain the mechanism behind it, then probably we can then look into the way we live our life and see what we can modify. So let's say, for example, now we live in Lagos, and you are just a normal average person, you're not that rich, so you probably walk and take public transport to go to your normal place of work to earn your living. So that activity that you're doing, that you walk to the bus stop and you get on the bus, and then there'll be fight and things like that. And then sometimes let me give you a good example now. You pay to take a bus from, say, Jaraba to Jolegba, and then the driver decides when you get to Ibadan or Isla to turn round, despite the fact that you've paid for the whole journey, and then you fight and you come down. So the remaining 100 meters, you've actually walked it to get to Ojuelegba. So those are normal activities that the people that are not so-called not rich in Nigeria, they do. They just don't consider it as exercise, but it's actually they're losing a lot of calories through that. Plus, the weather is actually very conducive for you to go out and do those activities, unlike what we have in our adopted country in Europe, for example, where the weather even discourages you, and then things are a lot easier. You don't you can just in the buses don't just stop anywhere. If one stops, you can get another one. There's less stress, so the opportunity for us to just naturally do activities becomes reduced. But as if you look at the rich people in Nigeria, for example, they have drivers, they don't walk, they don't take public transport, they don't get to do any of these activities. Even at home, they don't do anything. So the house help helps them to wash the dish. They don't wash their cars. They don't. So all these little activities that you actually don't consider as important, they help to burn the energy. I'm going to come to some calculations in a minute. And that's why the rich people end up having high blood pressure and diabetes in Nigeria and or some other societies like that. But we just laugh it out and we just say, oh, it's disease of the rich people. And the problem is when you come over here, where you don't do those activities naturally, then you're also like the rich people in Nigeria because you don't do those activities that help you to burn the excess energies that causes these conditions. So that's one. Now, if you look at by our culture, we don't necessarily take exercise as a way of life. Specific exercise like going to gym is changing now, but in the past we were never used to doing that because we just have the natural exercise that we do. Now, if we move to these kind of environments like in the United Kingdom, uh, we have to do deliberate exercise. Otherwise, you'll find out that the amount of exercise or physical activity you are doing will be reduced to the minimum. And if you're not disciplined enough to be going to gym, then you need to find some other ways to burn off the excess energy. And I will come to that in a minute. Things that we can be doing to help ourselves. Now, so an average adult, we expect to take about 2,000 kilocalories in a day because our body on average, and I'm saying average because we all need different energy level. So it depends on what we call your base metabolic rate. So a very tall person, for example, need more energy to maintain the height, the bones, various parts of the body compared to a short person. So I'm just using an average recommended one. They vary from individual to individual. So on average, we are expected to take about 2,000 kilocalories to maintain activities of the body in a day. Because in the day, averagely, we lose about 2,000 kilocalories. Again, I say average because women, for example, lose less. So some women will use average if they don't do any exercise, just getting up from bed, doing maybe chores, taking kids to school and coming back or going to work. They'll probably lose around 1,008 or depending, some people lose up to 2,000 too. Men, because we have more muscle mass, we naturally lose more energy than women. So men can lose up to 2,500. Some people lose up to 3,000 a day, depending on the nature of their work as well. So some help with the house chores that will take some energy, and then the nature of their job maybe is heavy lifting, running and things like that. So it varies, but averagely most men will lose anything between 1,800 to 3,000 kilocalories. Now, so if the average intake of energy is about 2,000 and you lose about 2,000 or thereabouts, so you find out that you're just maintaining yourself, you will not gain any extra energy. And this extra energy, if you are taking in 2,000 and you're only losing 1,500 because you are sedentary, you are inactive, you're just sitting at home watching TV, which doesn't require much energy, or sleeping most of the time, that doesn't take much energy. What will happen is that the extra energies, so say for example, 500 kilocalories in a day, the body doesn't know what to do with it. So what the body does is that it converts it to fat and store it in the body. So these fats are not good for cardiovascular system. So they're stored around our waist, and the various parts of the body which you are aware of. Also, part of it, if they contain the bad cholesterol, then they get stored in the vessels, which leads to the problem that I mentioned earlier. So, but on the other hand, if you take in 2,000 kilocalories in one day, and you're losing 2,500 through maybe your activities that you do, maybe very, or you do like intense exercise and things like that, in addition to your daily work, then you find out that you are losing, at the end of the day, you are negative 500 kilocalories. What that does is that the body needs extra energy, another 500 kilocalories to maintain normal activities. So what the body does is that it goes into the store and takes it from there. So, and one of the places it goes into, because there's no sugar, it goes into the fat. So naturally, it will just burn the fat to produce the extra energy that you need. So you can see that, in gaining weight, losing weight, and things like that, it's actually simple in the way you can control it. I know it's difficult in reality, but I just want to make it simple, what we can do to control our weight, because controlling weight and cholesterol in our body is a big it makes a big difference to what happens to our cardiovascular diseases. It determines who lives a good life, especially as you're getting older, and people that live a horrible life and struggle towards the end of their life. So it's important that we look at what we eat, and the content of what we eat. Now, so when I say 2,000 average in a day, that's the average for the day, but also the way you distribute it also matters. So for example, now, if you don't eat in the morning, you refuse to eat much in the afternoon, and then when you get home at night, you say, oh, after a day's work, I've worked very hard today, and you eat everything that you're supposed to have for the whole day. So you eat, let's say, for example, you just have like 200 kilocalories in the morning, another 200 in the afternoon. So naturally, when you get home at night, you are very tired. And then if you then go for 2,000 or 1,500, the problem is the body at night is not doing much. You're going to sleep. You don't need too much energy to sleep, or you're sitting down. So even though you've taken the 2,000 or about 2,000, much of it overnight will be stored as fat, because the body needs to do something with the excess energy. And then when you get up in the morning, that energy is not available to you anymore. It's already stored in the fat. So you're hungry and you want to eat. And then so it's a vicious cycle. So the way we distribute it as well also matters. Now, coming back to our type of food, the ones we are used to that we eat. Um, so we just need to be a bit careful and watch what we eat, because our food are actually they contain a lot of energy. So for example, now pounded yam or eba or gari, or even agege bread, for example, they contain actually a lot of energy. But I'm not saying that we shouldn't eat them. What I'm just saying is that we just need to manage the way we eat them. And I'll try and put them in context, for example. So an average, if you take like a big chunk of wrap of pounded yam, for example, plus egusi and everything, you will easily reach 1,000 kilocalories. That's half of what you need in a day. So, and imagine I know someone that eats it twice a day, in addition to other things. So then they take Coca-Cola and other things like that. And I know a friend that it will come home, it will take the whole agege bread, the whole loaf, plus we're going. Then he will wash it down with malt, and he will say, I cannot kill myself. So the problem is that he's killing himself gradually, because in that sitting alone, he's actually taking about 2,000 kilocalories, which will you will then become hungry later and take even more, and all this excess energy intake is not distributing it. It takes it and then it goes to bed or relaxes himself. So you can take agege bread and take it pounded down and take it and enjoy life. Life is meant to be enjoyed, but we just need to watch in the amounts that we take. It's knowing the fact that this thing contains a lot of energy, and then controlling the amount that you take whilst you still enjoy it. So I'm not advocating that we should just be eating salads and vegetables. I saw a colleague the other day, and he was eating salad, and it was very sad, looking not very happy. So I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, this is what they asked me to be eating now, so I can lose my weight." And I know that it's not going to last because he wasn't happy. It's not a natural way of life. You want to control your diet properly. You just need to do what you enjoy doing, but do it in moderation. And if we recall what the Prophet Sallallahu advised us, he said, eat one third of, fill the one third of your tummy with food, another third with water, and the third and the last third with air. I'll come also. So if we go by that, we'll live a healthy life. So it's the amount and the way we arrange it, and also if you avoid highly refined foods, those are where the problems are. What do I mean by highly refined foods? So things of the Coca-Cola of this world, not the diet one, the normal one, and the other highly refined foods, because the body can't handle them very well, so they just get stored. Whereas the complicated foods are actually well managed by the body. Okay, so I think I've gone a little bit into details of that because just want to help us to be able to manage our diets, because this is one major area that we all struggle with, including myself. Which is that, we need to know that our food in Africa are energy containing foods. And as such, we need to manage them very well, especially if you are not doing activities to waste the excess energy, you know, then you need to control what you take in. Um, some people ask sometimes, which is better? Is it when you want to lose weight and live a healthy life? Is it which one is better? Is it through dieting or through exercise? Um, it actually doesn't matter. You can do one or do both. Ideally, you do both in moderation, which will be better. But if you want to go into the details, it's actually diet that is more dangerous than not doing exercise, because what we eat is actually the cause of the problem. So if you don't eat enough, your body will still need around 2,000 kilocalories or whatever your body needs every day. So for example, now if any of you have visited someone in intensive care unit, for example, the first thing that will strike you when you get there is that they will have lost weight, and that's basically because they've not been able to eat if they were, unconscious, for example. And that's not even because they were not getting energy. They still give them food through a tube or into their veins, but the energy is not enough. So one of the first things that happens is that they lose their weight. So that tells you how strongly diet is. And there was there have been so many other experiments to compare them. There was one that they actually used identical twins. And the reason why they use identical twins were because identical twins, they have the same genetic makeup. They're essentially like the same set of people in their genetics. So if you do one experiment to one, you should expect the same thing to happen to the other, to happen in them if you do the same experiment to both of them. So what they did was that they took a few set of identical twins and put them in two groups. So say, for example, they take the entire from this set and pair them with the candidate from the other set. And then one set went on dieting and another set were put on exercise regime. At the end of a certain period of time, they were checked, and the people that lost more weight or became healthier were the people that restricted their diet. So that's another, of many research that's been done to show that it's actually what we eat that matters most if we are not able to do so much exercise. But doing both is important. And the exercise doesn't have to be rigorous. All we just need to do is moderate exercise, about 20 to 30 minutes in a day for every week. That's all we need to actually burn off the excess fats or cholesterol. Now, I'll touch briefly on cholesterol because people ask me sometimes, they say, you ask us not to eat bad cholesterol, but we don't know which one is good and which one is bad. And sometimes when they go and check online, the kind of examples they get are Caucasian foods. And so they get frustrated. They say, look, I don't know how to eat olive oil. And so I'm not going to start eating olive oil at my age. How do I cook more if I'm going to use olive oil and things like that? So the good cholesterol or good fats and oil, it's the top on the list will be things like olive oil and almond oil. But also next to them, which are not as good as them, but actually they are not as bad as people talk about them, is palm oil. The palm oil that we use is not bad, and granite oil is not bad as well. They contain, although they contain what we call the saturated fat, which are the ones we don't want, but they contain the unsaturated ones. So they're kind of balanced out, and if you eat them in moderation, they're fine. But things start getting worse if you start using sunflower oil, and the other ones that, or maybe corn oil. Because the problem is with those ones that they contain more of the bad fats, and so they they are difficult to get rid of in the body, and they lead to all these conditions that we mentioned earlier. As you would expect, those ones are actually cheaper when you get to the supermarket. So the sunflower oil and the corn oil and others are very cheap compared to peanut or groundnut oil or olive oil, which is more expensive. So it's just for us to be aware that the ones that we normally use, as long as it's groundnut oil or palm oil, is not bad. It's okay. It's just if you use them in moderation. You don't necessarily have to change to olive oil or almonds and things like that. So that's on the cholesterol, because sometimes we get questions around them. So other natural products like fruits, vegetables, well, again in moderation. So you don't eat the whole bowl of fruits and say, they ask us to eat fruits. Everything still needs to be in moderation. So, one or two apple a day or apple and banana and things like that, they are all right. Don't eat the whole bowl. So it's the point I want to make. But the more natural things are, the better, because our body was created to handle those natural things. We were the ones that decided to then start processing them, and the processing is not actually good for our body. So those are the other points that I want to mention on things that we can do to modify risk factors for heart attack and stroke. Now, what about, just briefly mention, what about those that then unfortunately have stroke, or they then, uh, what do we do? And is there anything we can do for them? So the first thing is, we all know, if you live in this country, call the ambulance to take them to hospital, because the earlier they get to hospital, the better their chances, because they can unblock that blockage and get blood supply to the rest of the brain that is still alive. That increases their chances of recovering if it's not a hemorrhagic one. And once they recover, their risk factors are still there. So they then need to again change their lifestyle, watch what they eat, the kind of activities they do, bad cholesterol they need to look after, take care of their blood pressure and things like that. So without going into too much details, I think maybe when we get to question and answers, I might be able to answer some of the questions that may be relevant. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.